About a year or so ago, I shot a video testing the accuracy of this router table setup. At the time, I was using the fence that came with the router table. This is a Ryobi universal router table. And the fence on that setup is two pieces of MDF that you can adjust to sort of open and close that gap. That was the fence I used for my accuracy test. That fence was like this one, attached to this larger fence that I made and put on the table saw fence itself. But it took me about a week to realize that that test was fundamentally flawed because I measured the accuracy in the way that doesn't give you any sort of idea how accurate the cut is. So I had left that video up as punishment to myself until such a time that I could shoot a new video showing the actual accuracy test. And that's going to be the subject of this video. So let me explain how I fucked up the accuracy test in the first place. So what I had done initially was to pass a piece of wood over the router bit. And after it was cut all the way through, I took a pair of calipers like this, and I measured the accuracy of the cut in 3 spots. I think I started at the beginning, I measured the middle, and I measured the top. And I found they were all pretty consistent. But I wasn't really thinking, because that type of measurement really only measures the router bit, and that distance is never going to change. This router bit isn't going to expand or contract. So here's an illustration of what I'm talking about. Imagine this is a piece of wood, and this wavy line is the world's worst router cut. It's wavy and it's clearly not straight, but in theory, it's possible if you measured here, actually any distance, that those measurements are going to be the exact same, because from left to right is always going to be the distance of the router bit. And that was the measurement I took. Instead, what I needed to do was measure this waviness against a flat, consistent reference surface like the end of a straight piece of wood. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. First, I'm going to show you how I cut a nice straight reference edge on a piece of wood. So this is what I use to get a straight edge on a piece of wood. This is a tapering jig, but it can also be used as a jointing jig, I suppose. So the way it works is pretty simple. There are a couple of knobs that sit on a piece of plywood, and those knobs are adjustable left and right. You put a piece of wood up against that fence, and I have a little sliding catch on the back that I can just set the piece of wood up against. And I push the piece of wood just a little bit over the edge just to get rid of any cup or bow or twist or whatever, and cut me a nice straight line. And the way this works is this edge right here is exactly flush with the table saw blade. And so whenever a piece of wood that's hanging over that is passed over the blade, it's going to get cut exactly parallel to this edge right here. So let me show you how it works in action. So this is the jig. Pretty simple. You use a pair of clamps, 2 at least, to push the workpiece down as you pass it over the blade so your fingers never get close to the blade. Very important. And you'll see after I'm done here, I don't pull it back through the blade. That's because I found that that sort of maybe sometimes nicks it or messes up the new fresh edge. So I let the blade come to a complete stop, retract, and then take it off. That is a pretty straight edge. So here I'm attaching my featherboards. These featherboards came with the router table, but I modified them to attach on the table instead of on the fence, and I have a video about that as well. I'm very happy with these, and I use them for pretty much every route I do. Now I am setting up the piece of wood. I'm putting the straight edge against the fence and putting a moderate amount of pressure on the stock with the featherboard, one on either side, and then I just clamp those featherboards down. And I've set my router bit here. Quickly about this fence, this is 3 pieces of 1/4-inch plywood glued together. I glued it together against a level so it would be as flat as I possibly could get it, and I edge banded the top there with oak edge banding. Attached it only 2 points of contact and hogged out the middle so it's one open spot, and sanded the edges on the inside so nothing catches, just lightly, not too much. All right, time for a cut. The featherboards push the workpiece against the fence, so I just have to worry about slowly passing it over the bit You can see the sawdust is starting to pile up on the left side of the fence. I was worried about that, so I was kind of blowing it and halting the cut to do that. In retrospect, that probably wasn't going to do any harm. The feather boards push the stock over the critical point, which is the cutter, consistently. So if there's a little bit of variation on the ends of the fences, probably shouldn't affect anything. So the last thing you got to do is take that same straight face and put it up against your table saw fence. I'm going to use a feather board just to give me a little bit more pressure toward the fence to make sure that piece doesn't wobble at all. And as I ride it along the fence, I'm going to measure any variation with this dial indicator set on a magnetic base. And I'm going to put the needle of the indicator right inside this face here. So what I want to see is how much variation, how much does it wobble on that inside face? Because this face against the fence is going to be completely parallel. So if this has any wobble or variation, that needle is going to go up and down and it will tell me. So let me get this set up and pass it on through. So always make sure that you've got pressure on what you're measuring so the dial indicator will actually move. So I retract a little bit and let it find its point on the face I'm going to measure, and then I zero it out. So there's always going to be some pressure on that face, and it will move up and down if there's variation from that zero. With the feather board pushing the stock against the fence, I slowly push the workpiece over the dial indicator. And what I'm looking for here is the total swing, the total left and right from zero that I get. You can see it's more or less hovering around the zero, maybe just a few thou. Each little tick mark, by the way, is a thou, or 1/1000th of an inch. But toward the end, it probably hits its biggest swing to the right about there. And that's the total swing. So it swung about 13 thou in one direction, about 5 thou in the other, and total of about 18 thou. That's a pretty liberal estimate of total variation. To give you some perspective, 18 thousandths of an inch is about this much set on some calipers. It's really a pretty small amount. I have no concerns whatsoever about a piece of wood fitting into that groove cut with that much variation. Overall, I'm very much a fan of this one-piece setup. I think I will stick with it. Much more accurate results.